Hello there, and welcome to Earth Before Light, the place where we let curiosity wander without a timer and give big questions the time they deserve. This isn't the sort of space for rushing through bullet points or hurrying to the end. Imagine Earth's entire life, 4.5 billion years, folded into a single, gentle day. Midnight strikes with dust and fire gathering into a world, a young planet breathing steam and metal. Dawn glows as oceans condense from sky-born rain, and the first whispers of chemistry begin to practice being alive. Noon belongs to microbes, quiet workers who eat stone and sunlight, exhale new skies, and write the opening chapters of everything to come. On this clock, dinosaurs roam in the late evening. Flowering forests learn fragrance and color under starlight. And we, curious, anxious, loving, breakable, arrive in the last seconds before midnight. If that sounds humbling, let it. Tonight's story is not a scolding. It's a lullaby about place and proportion. It asks a soft question. What if Earth never needed us to be complete? The continents would still drift. Mountains would still rise and kneel. Rivers would still braid silver through valleys. Life would still experiment, fail, and try again. The planet's pulse, its tides, volcanoes, and long, slow breaths of ice and warmth, would keep time whether or not we ever learned to count it. Hold the clock in your mind. At 12:00 a.m., Earth forms from a burning cloud. By 4:00 a.m., the first microbial hopes appear. Afternoon stretches for billions of years, with nothing loud enough to make headlines in a human world. Yet everything important is happening. Cells testing membranes, metabolism learning balance, blue-green architects filling the sky with oxygen as if repainting the atmosphere itself. Around 10:30 p.m., complex bodies bloom in strange seas. At 11:00 p.m., forests gather, insects hum, and continents shuffle like slow dancers. At 11:40 p.m., dinosaurs thunder across floodplains, then bow out. At 11:59 p.m., humans step on stage, blinking into the lights of a drama that has been running all day without us. This clock doesn't diminish us. It clarifies us. We are not the meaning of Earth. We are one of its late experiments in noticing. We can learn, care, repair, and love in ways rocks and rivers cannot. But the bedrock truth remains. The planet was already a masterpiece long before our language found the word. Even our boldest monuments, cities, dams, satellites, are sand sculptures at the edge of a patient tide. So tonight, breathe with the long day. Picture lava becoming basalt becoming clay, clay becoming the cradle of cells. Picture snow falling for 10,000 winters and melting for 10,000 springs, carving a valley grain by grain. Picture forests building cathedrals from sunlight and air, then returning that air to the wind. None of these require us, and yet here we are, invited to witness, to keep time, to care. This is part one of a quiet journey through deep time, From microbial dawns to coal dark forests, from five great endings to the humility of our brief Anthropocene, and finally to the meaning of being temporary on a planet that endures. If you're ready, we'll turn the clock back to Earth's earliest morning and meet the small lives that made a world. Before any forest breathed, before any wing beat the air, Earth wore a cloak of fire. The young crust cracked and healed like cooling glass. Volcanoes stitched the horizon, and the sky held more steam than stars. Yet even in that harsh beginning, something patient was underway. Heat meeting water, rock meeting time, chemistry trying door after door until one opened and stayed. Rain arrived first as a rumor, then as a flood that lasted ages. Imagine clouds so heavy with vapor that thunder sounded like the planet's heartbeat. Droplets met newborn continents and ran in silver threads toward the low places, gathering into basins that would become oceans. The seas were not gentle. They hissed with dissolved metals and carbon, warm as a bath over vents that breathed minerals into water, the way a forest breathes scent into air. But they were steady. With every storm, the world's skin cooled. With every river, the salts of the crust flowed seaward to learn the taste of brine. Down where the sunlight fades, where basalt is soft with heat and the seafloor splits, black chimneys grew like mineral trees. From their sides, dark waters pulsed, iron, sulfur, hydrogen, carbon, the raw alphabet of reactions. Here, gradients ruled, hot to cold, acidic to alkaline, rich to hungry, and life loves a gradient. Picture membranes forming by accident, and then on purpose. Bubbles of chemistry that learned to keep what helped and let go of what didn't. Picture 1,000 failures for every fragile success, and time long enough to forgive them all. If there was a first ancestor, it was likely small enough to hide in a drop and humble enough to be powered by rock. It didn't need sunlight or oxygen. It needed a place where energy fell like rain across a boundary it could call a self. In that micro-world, a few reactions found rhythm, taking in, letting out, harvesting a trickle of power from the clash between vent water and ocean water. The sea, in other words, was already practicing metabolism before we had the word for food. Above, the crust thickened. The bombardment that scarred the young moon eased. Continents, embryonic and soft, began their slow drift. Storm by storm, the sky cleared from opaque to merely heavy. Lightning wrote brief signatures across clouds, and in tide pools along iron-red shores, molecules tried on new shapes. Some stuck, some copied themselves, some broke, and in breaking made room for better fits. Hold this picture gently. A world no one is watching, and yet everything necessary is happening. No cities, no songs, only heat, water, rock, and time building a stage sturdy enough for a future. Earth didn't ask for witnesses. It asked for balance, and kept searching until it found a way to hold it. When we say the planet never needed us, we also mean this. It learned to become habitable from the inside out. By the time eyes evolved to see the horizon had already been rehearsing for billions of years. More than 3 billion years ago, the planet's greatest engineers were soft as mist and smaller than dust. They left no statues, only textures, faint ripples in ancient rocks, layered domes called stromatolites, where mats of microbes trapped grains and lifted themselves toward the light. If Earth had a first city, it was a carpet, thin, living, and patient, spread across tidal flats and shallow shelves, growing by day, resting by night, and recording the rhythm of waves the way tree rings record seasons. Inside these mats, life learned to specialize. Some microbes breathed minerals, others traded in sulfur, and some, quiet revolutionaries, practiced photosynthesis without oxygen, harvesting light in purple and green and sending their energy down the line. Imagine a cathedral of cells, each a tiny room with a boundary fine as soap film, yet sturdy enough to shelter a chemistry that copied itself. The lineage we call Luca, the last universal common ancestor, wasn't a single mother, but a neighborhood of solutions that worked long enough to spread. Cooperation came early. The mats were not just communities, they were conversations in molecules. Waste for one became food for another. Gradients in light, in acidity, in nutrients were ladders for energy to climb. When storms tore the carpets, fragments drifted, resettled, and started over. Failure was not an ending. It was propagation by other means. With time, a new trick sharpened: water-splitting photosynthesis. It was daring because splitting water frees oxygen, a reactive gas that bites at metals and breaks old chemistries. But the payoff was immense: abundant sunlight into steady power. Tiny by tiny, oxygen leaked into the seas, then the skies, first as poison, then as possibility. Iron in the oceans rusted and fell to the seafloor in striped layers, Earth's early ledger of breath. Later, when the sinks filled and the atmosphere tipped, blue became the color of day. None of this needed eyes to witness it. The choreography was written by thermodynamics and chance, rehearsed across continents of time. Cells learned membranes that pumped and stored power. They refined the code, those 4 letters that would someday spell forests and lungs and lullabies. They built the scaffolding upon which every future body would stand, and they did it without intention, only persistence. If you stand by a quiet shore at dusk and watch ripples drift over sand, you are watching an echo of that early world. The planet sought balance and found it in communities too small to see. They raised the first reefs, exhaled the first breezes we could have survived, and set the stage for complexity to come. Earth was already a masterpiece, self-cooling, self-cycling, self-experimenting. We are latecomers to a long conversation that microbes began in whispers. For a long, long morning on our 24-hour Earth, the sky would not have looked like ours. Hazy, heavy, tinted by volcanic breaths and sunlight scattered through a thicker air. It felt more like a ceiling than a window. Then the smallest citizens rewrote it. As water-splitting photosynthesis spread, oxygen began pooling in the oceans, rusting iron into banded layers like pages in a red and black book. When the pages ran out of ink, when the seas could no longer swallow the excess, the gas escaped upward. Blue arrived. We treat blue as ordinary. It isn't. It is an announcement. Light scattering through a thinning, oxidizing sky. A promise that future lungs might someday find breath. But oxygen's gift came with sharp edges. It was at first a toxin to the metabolisms that had grown comfortable in a low-oxygen world. Old chemistries failed. Lineages blinked out. New strategies, enzymes that tamed oxygen's bite, cellular compartments that quarantined reactions, earned their ticket forward. Change rarely travels alone. As methane, a potent greenhouse gas, was stripped away by oxygen, the planet's blanket thinned. Ice crept from the poles and, perhaps more than once, advanced so far that Earth wore a near-global shell. Snowball episodes that turned oceans into sealed libraries and continents into mirrors. Picture sunlight bouncing back into space, storms whispering snow instead of rain, and only the dark warmth around undersea vents and thin belts of open water keeping the book of life from closing. Yet the book did not close. Under the ice, chemistry kept whispering. Volcanoes, patient as mountains, continued to exhale carbon dioxide. Over long spans, the blanket thickened again. Ice retreated. Rivers woke. The blue sky brightened over a world that had been tested and found resilient. Out of these oscillations, poison to possibility, warmth to winter to warmth, life gained tools it would need forever: flexibility, redundancy, community. It is tempting to read intention into this sequence, as if Earth planned for us. But the lesson is quieter and more honest. The planet learned balance by overshooting and correcting, by letting feedbacks speak. Oxygen rose because it could. Glaciers spread because physics allowed it. Recovery came because the carbon cycle, bent, refused to break. No audience required, no permission asked. When you look up on a clear afternoon and feel steadied by the sky's soft color, remember, that blue is a biography. It carries the labor of microbes, the rust of ancient seas, the hush of global winters, and the long exhale of volcanoes. It says the stage is sturdy enough for what comes next. After the sky turned blue and the ice remembered how to melt, life tried a daring kind of partnership. Picture two tiny cells meeting at a rough edge of the world, an ancestral host with room inside, and a smaller wanderer that knew how to harvest energy from oxygen's bite. Instead of one devouring the other, they struck a bargain. The guest became a tenant, then a worker, then family. We call the descendants of that pact mitochondria, the powerhouses that let complexity pay its bills. Energy changed everything. With a steady surplus, cells could afford larger genomes, new tools, and internal architecture. Filaments, actin and microtubules grew into a living skeleton that could push and pull, fold and flow. Membranes tucked inward to make rooms, a nucleus to guard the code, endoplasmic reticulum to fold proteins, Golgi stacks to ship them like careful parcels. The cell became a city with traffic rules, budgets, and neighborhoods. In some lineages, another pact formed. A photosynthetic bacterium, kin to those ancient oxygen makers, took up residence within a larger cell. It kept its talent for turning light into sugar and over time became a chloroplast. From this quiet union, the green of the world was born. Forests would later be cathedrals of such cells, each leaf a million rooms of sunlight work. These mergers left clues, tiny circles of DNA in mitochondria and chloroplasts, ribosomes more like bacterias than our own, double membranes that read like the history of an arrival and a welcome. But no storyteller was required. Chance introduced, chemistry negotiated, selection signed the lease. The planet's habit of finding balance had discovered a new instrument. Cooperation deep enough to blur the line between self and other. Then came another revolution, one that wasn't about organelles at all, but about time. Sex, meiosis, recombination, the mixing and shuffling of genes, taught life how to explore possibility faster. Instead of waiting for random mutations alone, lineages could remix what already worked and sometimes stumble into what would work even better. Variation widened. Evolution found more paths through the maze. With energy, interiors, and genetic jazz, the stage was set for bodies to try being many instead of one. Cells learned to stick, to specialize, to keep promises to one another across lifetimes. Soon, the ocean would hold creatures with mouths and muscles, nerves and light-sensing domes, shells and simple spines. But even as the spotlight widened, the lesson stayed gentle and central. None of this needed us. The agreements that make lungs and leaves possible were inked in deep time by partners who never planned a future and found one anyway. If you listen closely to your own breath, you are hearing the echo of that first bargain, the hum of mitochondria turning oxygen into power, the rhythm of a very old pact kept faithfully in the dark. Before the grand overture of the Cambrian, the ocean dimmed to a softer light, and something ghost-like drifted across the sea floor. Pillows and fronds, ribbons and quilts. Creatures so gentle they seem more like thoughts of animals than animals themselves. We call them Ediacaran forms, enigmas pressed into stone like moonlight caught in mud. Picture a quiet shelf of sea, waves combing the sand in long, slow breaths. On that canvas, bodies tried being bodies. Some lay flat and broad, drinking chemistry straight through their skin. Some grew like ferns, feathery fronds lifting into the current to sip whatever food the water carried. Others shaped themselves into soft discs, puckered ovals, or quilts stitched with repeating modules, as if the blueprint for complexity was being prototyped in cloth. Collagen, Tough, ropey protein was the hidden permission slip. With oxygen finally steady enough, evolution could afford scaffolding. Tissues could hold their shape. The world that had long been cell against cell learned how to be layer upon layer, a conversation in fiber and gel. Sponges filtered the sea. Tiny worms wrote cursive in the sediment. Jelly-like forms pulsed beneath a dim sun that was, for them, bright enough. If you ran your hand over an Ediacaran seafloor, you wouldn't feel claws or shells. You'd feel hush. A community without hard teeth or armor, surviving by being early, by fitting the gentle world that existed before predators sharpened the rules. They left few mouths to study, few eyes to meet. What they left, mainly, are impressions, negative space made holy by patience, teaching us that even the faintest lives can be loud if given 1 billion years to echo. Then, gradually, the dial turned. Geology rehearsed a new score. Nutrients pulsed from weathering continents. Oxygen rose another notch. And the arms race began. Tiny tools, grips, scrapes, stings, changed the conversation. Being soft and still wasn't always enough. The ocean asked for movement, sensing, decisions, and life, which had never stopped experimenting, obliged. This is not a tragedy for the Ediacaran world. It is a turning of a page. Some lineages faded, unable to meet the new tempo. Others handed forward ideas, tissues that seal, tubes that shuttle breath and food, bodies that know up from down and front from back. When the curtain lifts on the Cambrian, those ideas will burst into forms so strange and vivid that even rock seems excited to remember them. Hold the Ediacaran in your mind, the way you hold the memory of a lullaby you can't quite place. It was a season when the planet practiced tenderness at scale, when the rules were soft and the solutions softer. Earth did not need witnesses then. It needed conditions, and it made them. It did not need us to clap. It needed time, and it had oceans of it. If you listen closely, you can still hear that evening in the way a jellyfish floats, in the way a fern frond uncurls in a tide pool at dusk. Before shells clicked and jaws bit, life learned the grace of simply being, and the world made room for it. Morning broke fast. Cross shelves of clear, shallow seas, bodies discovered edges, front and back, mouth and tail, inside and out. Shells thickened, limbs learned push and pull, and somewhere in that bright water an eye opened. Vision sharpened the world from a haze into a map, and once the world could be seen, it could be chased, hidden in, signaled to, and sung across with motion. We call it the Cambrian explosion, not a single blast, but a quickening. Oxygen held steady, nutrients pulsed from eroding continents. Genetics found tools to sketch bodies quickly. Regulatory switches, Hox genes, patterns that could be reused like motifs in music. Out of these permissions, the sea filled with rehearsals that became performances. Trilobites scrolled across the seafloor in armored files. Bristle worms wrote cursive in sediment and then learned to swim it. Sponges refined the art of filtering light-filled water, and spiky echinoderms tested five-fold symmetry like a quiet riddle. Predation changed the conversation. Anomalocaris, big, swift, curious, swept the water column with grasping frontal limbs and a ring of teeth. In reply, armor thickened, burrows deepened, spines, plates, and clever curls appeared. Skeletons of calcium carbonate and phosphate were not just shields, they were scaffolds for precision, giving muscles something firm to pull against and senses a stable home. Eyes multiplied. Compound eyes with dozens, then hundreds, of lenses turned sunlight into information, contrast, motion, approach. With sight came behavior, pursuit, evasion, display. The sea became a grammar of choices, and nervous systems grew to parse it. Simple nerve nets gathered into chords. Chords thickened into early brains. The tempo rose, but the melody stayed old. Gradients, energy, balance, community, now expressed in faster phrases. Even in this riot of invention, restraint governed. Shells were expensive. Vision burned energy. Speed demanded fuel. Every advantage had a cost, and ecosystems found ways to pay the bill. Food webs braided from microbial crusts to grazing herds to swift hunters and back down through scavengers and bacteria that returned elements to the sea. Waste became resource, again and again, the loop closing with quiet elegance. If you hold a trilobite fossil in your palm, you feel the cool patience of shale and the warm audacity of a life that once chose. Here is a creature that measured the world with eyes, solved problems with legs and plates, fell to a hunter or a storm, and in falling, entered the archive where stone remembers everything. No one needed to witness it. The planet recorded because that is what pressure and time do. The Cambrian did not invent meaning. It invented articulation. Bodies gained syllables, joints, jaws, lenses, and life spoke more clearly through them. Earth remained complete without us. We are late students of a language that trilobites already spoke in light and limb. After the Cambrian's quickening, the ocean took a deep, luxurious breath and filled itself with architecture. Reefs, true cathedrals of limestone, rose from the shallows, stitched by corals and their quieter partners, the bryozoans. Trilobites refined their suits of plate and hinge. Feather-like crinoids stood like lanterns on stalks, catching snowfalls of food. Graptolites traced calligraphy in the water column, drifting colonies writing a daily script of hunger and growth. And then there were the rulers with coils, straight-shelled nautiloid cephalopods, long as boats, eyes like patient moons. They patrolled the blue avenues between reef and open water, buoyant with chambers, steering with jets of breath, testing prey with cleverness that would, in time, become a hallmark of their lineage. Below them, jawless fish, armored in pebbled plates, glided like living commas over the seabed, a hint of vertebrate sentences to come. This was the Great Ordovician biodiversification event, a mouthful of a phrase for a simple truth. Life learned to use the sea's rooms more completely. Niches multiplied. Food webs braided tighter. The world didn't get louder. It got richer, as if the same melody acquired harmonies in registers we hadn't heard before. Light sifted through clear water onto cities of stone and tissue, and everything seemed set for a long afternoon of abundance. But Earth writes with climate, as well as with cells. Far to the south, the supercontinent Gondwana drifted over the pole and began to wear a crown of ice. Glaciers grew fat and bright. Sea levels fell, strand by strand, pulling shorelines outward and draining warm, shallow habitats where the reefs had flourished. Currents shifted, chemistry changed. In a span quick on the geologic clock, the ocean's comfort thinned, and with it, many of the lives that depended on that comfort. The first of the Big Five mass extinctions arrived not with a single blow, but with the cold logic of physics. Grow ice, lower seas, overturn the map of shallow places. Reefs suffered. Planktonic scribes faded. Some trilobites closed their books forever. And yet, even this was a kind of editing that the planet knows how to do. Carbon dioxide would later climb again. Ice would sigh and retreat. Shorelines would creep back toward their old addresses, and survivors would inherit both empty rooms and hard-won lessons. We are tempted to read meaning into the winter. Punishment, warning, plan. But Earth's honesty is simpler. Feedbacks answered forcings. Albedo answered sunlight. Water and rock negotiated as they always do. No council met. No intention steered. The resilience that followed did not require witnesses, only cycles and the old habit of trying. If you hold a piece of Ordovician limestone to your ear, you won't hear the sea. You might hear something steadier. The patience of calcium laid down grain by grain. The quiet arithmetic of growth and loss. The memory of a blue world that built cities and then ceded them to winter. It is a softer lesson than drama suggests. Completion is not perfection. Balance is not stillness. The ice will loosen. The reefs will learn new forms. On nearby shores, the first green will reach out of water and touch wind. When the Ordovician winter loosened its grip, coastlines crept inward again, and the sea exhaled warmth. Reefs rehearsed new architectures, corals and sponges colonizing the light-swept shallows. In deeper channels, fish refined their experiments, fins stiffening, armor plates articulating, jaws sketching their first decisive arcs. But the quiet revolution was not in water. It was at the seam where tide abandons rock and wind begins, the world's first true greenery stepping onto land. Picture a shoreline after rain, its stones dark as tea. Between pebbles, filaments, and mats, lichens, algae, bacterial crews had long been at work etching minerals, trading acids for shelter, turning bare crust into something that could remember moisture. Now, small stems rose from that preparation. Cooksonia-sized bodies, mere inches high, held themselves upright with tubes that could move water and minerals, primitive vascular tissue, a highway inside a thread. At their tips, sporangia lifted spores into the breeze, borrowing the wind's patience to try new ground. The air was no longer as harsh as it once had been. Oxygen had become a steady citizen of the sky. Sunlight, scattered by that oxidizing air, painted days in a familiar blue. And high above, an ozone veil thickened, softening the sun's bite. With each season, thin soils deepened. Microbes stitched grains into communities. Water lingered a little longer in shade. The land, once a blank page of rock and dust, began to hold ink. Follow one of those green threads in your mind. Its cells drink light and exhale sugar to build more self. Its simple plumbing carries a trickle of stream water upward against gravity, a small defiance repeated leaf by infant leaf. Its spores lift, land, split, and try again. No flowers yet, no seeds, just the first grammar of stems and pores, a rehearsal for forests still centuries of millions away. Animals were not far behind. Along damp margins, early arthropods tested the air, millipede-kin with many feet measuring the ground. Scorpion relatives lifting their bodies clear of the surface to breathe more steadily. Mites and springtails working the litter that plants began to leave. Their footprints, pressed into ancient mud, look like punctuation in a new language, the first sentences of wilderness written on land. Meanwhile, the seas did not surrender their primacy. Rugose and tabulate corals raised layered neighborhoods alive with currents. Jawed fish learned precision, placoderms with visor helm heads, acanthodians testing spines and speed. The food webs grew denser, their loops closing more tightly between plankton, reef, hunter, and decay, each exchange returning elements to cycles the planet had been perfecting since before the sky was blue. None of this asked for us. The planet was solving for stability, turning sunlight into structure, turning wind into courier, turning stone into soil into stem. What began as a coastline of bare mineral now held shade. Thin, yes, but real. Shade is a promise. In time it will become canopy, swamp, cold, dark memory. If you walk a modern salt marsh at dusk and see rushes lift out of mirror water, you are watching the Silurian's echo, a soft insistence that land can learn to breathe. By the Devonian, the coastline's whisper had become a conversation. Plants learned depth. Roots, once tentative threads, pushed hard into stone, prying minerals loose, stitching soil together grain by grain. Leaves broadened into green sails that caught light and wind, and stems thickened into wood strong enough to stand against storms. Along banks and floodplains, the first true trees rose, not yet the forests we know, but something that could cast shade wide enough for cool to happen beneath it. Roots changed more than landscapes. They changed physics. When rain fell, it no longer tore the ground to slurry and rush it straight to sea. Webs of root and fungal partner held earth in place, letting water linger, sip, and sink. Rivers, newly tethered to their banks, stopped lunging and began to meander, curling like careful cursive across floodplains. Where loops pinched, oxbow lakes were born, quiet pockets where silt settled and lives could practice stillness. The air felt different, too. Every leaf was a wager on sunlight, a trade. Carbon from sky into structure, oxygen back into wind. With millions of new leaves, that trade scaled up. Carbon dioxide dipped. Seasons learned cooler edges. The planet's long thermostat, weathering rock, burying carbon, exhaling volcano, found a fresh setting through wood, root, and rot. Beneath the green, water held its own renaissance. The age of fishes earned its name honestly. Sharks refined sleek bodies tuned to the grammar of currents. Ray-finned fish tried delicate scaffolds of bone that would one day fill seas with gleam. In murkier shallows, lobe-finned fish, heavy-finned, lung-kissed, tested strength and breath in places where pools shrank and grew with drought and rain. Their fins were not quite feet, but they were thoughts of feet. Along the margins where roots made a lace of shelter and insects worked the litter, those thoughts deepened. Shoulders stiffened. Necks learned to pivot. Simple lungs, once emergency gear for low-oxygen ponds, became steady partners to gills. Mouths that once sifted mud learned to take a gulp of air and hold it. No one declared an invasion of land. Instead, bodies followed opportunity from pool to puddle to fern-edged bank, as if curiosity were an ancient sense. Forests were not yet dark, but they were tall enough for twilight to happen at noon. In that green dusk, the planet rehearsed the logic it would later use at larger scales. Build complexity, tie it together with cycles, then let feedbacks speak. Wood lifted water. Water moved soil. Soil fed roots. Roots slowed rivers. Rivers braided life across valleys. And through it all, the sky kept the oldest promise. Light by day, cool by night. A rhythm even the youngest leaf could trust. If you stand by a modern river and watch it draw a lazy S across a plain, you are reading the Devonian's handwriting. The curve is a signature of roots. Earth still didn't need us. It needed only energy, chemistry, and time. But if we listen softly, the Devonian teaches something that feels personal. When you grow deeper, you don't just rise. You reshape the flow around you. The Devonian's handwriting, roots, rivers, wood, turned in the Carboniferous into a whole library. Imagine low continents stitched with wetlands, warm air heavy with mist, and a canopy not of oaks or pines, but of club moss trees, towering horsetails, and broad-shouldered seed ferns. Trunks rose like columns from black water, bark armored in diamond patterns. Above, crowns unfurled fronds big as sails. Below, the ground was sponge and mirror, peat beds, standing pools, fallen logs soft with time. Oxygen climbed, with forests pulling carbon from the sky and burying it faster than volcanoes could return it. The air fattened with breath. In that rich atmosphere, flames learned to speak more easily. Wildfire's signature flickered through deep time, and some arthropods grew to improbable grace. Dragonflies with wings as wide as a hawk's hunted over cattail dusk. Millipede kin the length of a door slid through leaf litter in slow, deliberate paragraphs. The world did not feel monstrous. It felt generous, as if the planet had exhaled and left the exhale hanging. Beneath the waterline, amphibians widened their stories. Some kept close to the shallows, paddling between buttress roots and breathing through skin slick with life. Others broadened ribs, strengthened wrists, and pressed farther onto land's uneven sentences. Then a quiet invention changed time itself for vertebrates. The amniotic egg, a private pond wrapped in membranes and shell. With portable water, bodies could carry the sea inside them and walk the dry miles between real ones. Reptiles, small at first and careful, stepped into new hours of the day. Coal was being written all the while. Lignin, the tough scaffolding in wood, was a novel dialect, and decomposers hadn't yet mastered its grammar. Logs piled up in wet anoxia, layer upon patient layer, compressing under their own history. Pressure and heat would later turn those pages into the black volumes we mine, burn, and misread as ours. But these were Earth's journals long before our hands found them. Each seam is a chorus of summers, a memory of sun translated into stone. The swamps taught more than carbon accounting. They taught architecture at landscape scale, how shade cools water, how water hosts nurseries, how nurseries feed canopies, how canopies change air. Mycorrhizal threads, fungal filigree, stitched root to root, trading sugars for minerals, weaving neighborhoods where a forest could behave like an organism. Insects invented song and metamorphosis, turning one body into another to split the bill of survival across life stages. Feedbacks tightened, loops closed, complexity felt steady underfoot. Yet even cathedrals meet weather. As the Carboniferous leaned into its late chapters, continents began to gather toward a single broad embrace, Pangea assembling, and climates shifted from swampy equators to wider belts of dryness. The wet symphony softened in places, the score modulated. None of it was personal. Rock spoke to ocean, ocean to sky, sky to leaf, and leaf, as always, listened. If you hold a piece of coal and smear your fingers, you are touching Devonian light, edited by Carboniferous rain and stored by patience. You are not touching a promise to us. Earth never needed a reader for these books, but we, arriving late, can learn to read them without setting them on fire. Twilight gathers in the coal forests. Beyond the trees, a supercontinent waits, and with it, deserts, new engines for wind, and the strangest turn yet in the planet's weather. Continents that had drifted like unhurried rafts began to shoulder together, suturing coastlines into a single wide back called Pangea. Where swamps had once braided across low latitudes, the land rose into belts of dryness. Wind found long, empty aisles to run. Dunes marched, Rivers, when they came, arrived in pulses, flash, flood, memory, then left stones drying in the sun. Forests did not vanish. They adapted. Seeds, little time capsules of food and patience, replaced the old dependence on standing water. Cones and naked seeds of early gymnosperms took the stage. Tall conifers, fan-leaved cycads, ginkgos with their deliberate fans. Each seed was a private plan, a coat against drought, an embryo with rations, the promise to wait for a season that would keep its word. Where bogs had measured time in moss and peat, uplands now counted it in resin and rings. The air changed with the score. With fewer vast wetlands burying carbon and more dry interiors radiating heat, oxygen gradually stepped down from its carboniferous heights. Insects, which had swelled to improbable spans in the oxygen-rich twilight, edged back toward narrower measures. Flight kept its grace, but wings fit the sky more tightly. Fire still spoke, but in a different dialect. Grass was not yet here to script fast flames, so heat wrote its letters in resinous canopies and dry litter when lightning sought ground. Animals met the dryness with new tools. Along river margins and shaded gullies, amphibians kept their wet allegiances. But on the broader, open pages of Pangaea, reptiles wrote the bolder text. The amniotic egg, water carried within, freed them to range far from ponds. Scales reduced evaporation. Limbs under the body, in some lineages, learned to carry weight across hot flats. Synapsids, our deep kin, thickened skull arches and refined jaws, teeth differentiating into incisors, canines, and grinders that made meals more efficient and time more available for other work. These mammal-like reptilian ancestors, pelycosaurs at first, later the more upright therapsids, spread into niches that swamps had not offered. Sun-baked uplands, seasonal basins, desert edges swept by monsoon rhythms. Spines rose on some backs, sails that may have balanced heat in a world of extremes. In others, faces broadened, nostrils tucked back, and perhaps soft tissues began to hint at warm-blooded futures. None of this was destiny. It was the old habit of finding workable answers in whatever materials the present allowed. Geology left its signatures like careful underlines. Cross-bedded sandstones pin the angles of ancient dunes. Evaporite layers, halite, gypsum, mark basins where seawater came and went, leaving crystals instead of shells. Red beds, stained by iron under open air, tell of landscapes with more oxidation than standing water. When you see these colors in a canyon wall, you are reading weather. Wind dominant, rain seasonal, sunlight with few filters between it and the ground. Pangaea didn't just rearrange maps, it rearranged climate engines. A supercontinent grows hot inside and cold at its edges. Monsoons strengthen when summer tilts toward the sun. Ocean circulation shifts when coasts close and open. The planet's thermostat, deep and slow, clicked to a new setting, and ecosystems followed. Earth still did not need us for any of this. It needed only mass, spin, sunlight, chemistry, and time. Yet standing on a modern dune and feeling the wind comb its surface, you can sense the same arithmetic that guided those Permian sands. Grains climb a gentle slope, tumble down a steep face, and the whole hill moves without hurry. It is balance expressed as migration. Behind this broad calm, the stagehands were changing props. Volcanic provinces stirred. The carbon cycle tightened and strained. The line between stability and stress, always a negotiation, began to blur. At the close of the Permian, the planet missed a step. Far in the north, a wound opened in Earth's crust, the Siberian traps, and for 1,000,000 troubled years, the ground became a fountain. Basalt spilled in sheets, black rivers of stone cooling in waves, while chimneys exhaled heat and gases in volumes our minds can't comfortably hold. Carbon dioxide rose, then rose again. Air warmed, rains shifted. Oceans, faithful keepers of balance, began to lose the script. Warming water holds less breath. Circulation faltered. Deep basins, once stirred by cold, sank into stillness. Oxygen thinned in the dark, and then went missing. In that hush, microbes that thrive without oxygen bloomed, recoloring chemistry itself. Sulfide, sharp, poisonous, leaked upward. Surface waters turned strange. Acid-nibbling shells, heat-stressing bodies built for gentler tides. Reefs unraveled, not in a single crash, but in a long tearing that felt like silence getting louder. On land, heat and drought braided with ash-laced rain. Soils, the quiet engines of forests, lost their grip. Rivers ran muddy, then thin. The coal swamp legacy of earlier ages, those cathedrals of wet shade, could not keep their promises in a season that forgot how to end. Insects that had sung for hundreds of millions of years fell quiet in many places. Synapsids and reptile kin, tough and various, met a map that no longer matched their bodies. Most stories closed. Mass extinction is a phrase of arithmetic, but what it feels like is loneliness. Empty rooms in the food web, niches unbraided, feedbacks that once stabilized, now amplifying the wrong notes. Fire took more than it gave. Rain came hard or not at all. The planet did not intend this. It simply followed physics. Flood a sky with greenhouse gases, warm the sea, slow the breath of the deep, change the rules, then live with the consequences. And yet, even in that dark noon, continuity persisted. A few lineages found narrow paths through the heat and hush. Seed plants with durable coats waited out bad seasons and took root where chance allowed. Along scoured floodplains, small, sturdy vertebrates, beaked, tusked, shovel-faced, measured survival one drought at a time. In the sea, humble burrowers kept stirring the upper sediments, tiny movements that helped oxygen find a toehold when circulation finally remembered its chores. Recovery was not a rebound, it was convalescence. The carbon cycle, strained but unbroken, began to exhale more slowly. Weathering pulled gases back into stone. Volcanic fever cooled. Over long, patient spans, oxygen crept into depth, and the poisonous blooms dimmed. Vacant rooms invited invention. The survivors' children would inherit a planet rearranged, and they would learn to use it in ways the Permian never asked for. When we say Earth never needed us, we are also saying this: it has survived worse than our absence. It has learned to right its balance across catastrophe and quiet alike. The Great Dying was not a moral. It was a lesson in thresholds, how systems hold, then fold, then, after hard work, hold again in a different key. If you hold a piece of weathered basalt and feel its cool weight, you are touching the ink of that chapter. Black rock, spilled in grief, that forced the world to edit itself. Out of that edit, a leaner cast will step onto Triassic stages and begin again. After the Great Dying, the planet woke to a quieter dawn. Landscapes looked spare. Broad river plains under a high, bright sun. Red beds of oxidized sand. Conifer silhouettes holding their breath against long seasons. But in that hush, recovery began. It did not start with giants. It started with stubbornness. Imagine a shovel-faced survivor nosing through floodplain silt. Lystrosaurus, wide-ribbed and unpretentious, wearing the plain clothes of endurance. It grazed on low growth, dug for roots, and carried the story forward when so many chapters had ended. Around it, seed plants, conifers, cycads, ginkgos, stitched green back into a world that had been edited to bone and wind. Spores lifted. Seeds waited out the harsh spells and opened when rain remembered how to fall. Pangaea still sprawled, so climate wrote in bold strokes. Fierce summers, long droughts, sudden monsoons that turned dust to chocolate water. Rivers shifted their beds, left oxbow mirrors in their wake, and spread silts that invited new communities. Insects relearned their songs. Burrowers, those quiet custodians, kept stirring the soil so breath could return to ground. On this lean stage, a new caste took early bows. Archosaurs, the ruling reptiles, diverged into two great lineages. One, the crocodile line, tried armored backs, pillar-like legs, and a patience for ambush that would last to modern swamps. The other, lighter at the ankle and quicker at the hip, gave rise to pterosaurs in the air and dinosaurs on land. At first, dinosaurs were not thunder. They were grace. Slender, two-legged runners with hands free to balance, tails held level like a tightrope pole, feet writing quick, three-toed scripts across wet sand. Offshore, the sea practiced new shapes of speed. Ichthyosaurs, reptiles remade in the image of a fish, cut arcs through blue water. Their big eyes gathering light, their bodies powered by tails that understood the physics of lift and thrust. Along coastal shelves, nothosaurs leaned into a seal-like compromise, paddling water, shuffling land, while later plesiosaurs would broaden the experiment with long necks and wide oar-driven chests. Each design was a conversation between buoyancy and hunger, drag and desire. Reefs, broken in the Permian silence, returned in altered chords. Instead of the old architects, new coral partners and sponges built habitats piece by patient piece, inviting small fish and invertebrates to braid complexity back into the shallows. Food webs thickened from threads to nets. Feedbacks, nutrient cycles, shade, currents found their voices again. None of this was destiny, and none of it needed us. It was the planet's familiar method. Start simple. Secure the basics. Breath, shelter, loops that close. Then let time widen possibility. Where heat once unstitched the world, balance now reknitted it. Where emptiness once rang, footsteps began to write. By the late Triassic, storms cracked open evenings over fern meadows, and the air held the faintest tremor of futures. Wings testing thermals above canyon walls. Small, quick dinosaurs tracing paths between conifer shadows. Crocline hunters leaving drag marks where bellies met riverbanks. The stage was ready for scale to return, not as a roar all at once, but as inches added year after year to bones that trusted the seasons again. If you stand on a dry wash today and feel the first raindrops of a monsoon, you are inside that old rhythm: scarcity, arrival, green. The Triassic teaches a soft courage. Go light, move early, keep breathing. Pangaea began to loosen its long embrace. Cracks widened into valleys, valleys into young seas, and coastlines multiplied like new lines on a palm. With rifting came moisture. Monsoons turned to steadier rains, and the air felt less like a kiln and more like a greenhouse. Conifers, cycads, and ginkgos climbed slopes and crowded river margins, their crowns writing slow shadows over fern floors. Forest returned, not the cold, dark swamps of old, but upland cathedrals of resin and wind. In these aisles of green, long necks learned the sky. Sauropods, bodies like moving hills, balanced light heads on telescoping vertebrae, hearts pumping tall. They grazed on height itself, turning sunlight condensed in needles into muscle and heartbeat. Nearby, theropods refined economy, hollow bones, quick steps, tails held like counterweights. Some grew large and thundered. Others stayed small and curious, weaving through understory with hands still free to gesture at the future. Above the tree line, another experiment matured. Pterosaurs widened the dictionary of air, membranes stretched from fingertip to ankle, bones thinned to the architecture of kites, chests deepened to houseflight's bellows. They did not flap like birds. They mastered launch, glide, and the art of folding the sky into distance. And then, in the canopy's filtered light, feathers that once kept bodies warm began to catch air. A theropod's leap became a glide a beat, and a beat a habit. Archaeopteryx left ink on limestone, a palm-sized rumor with teeth, claws, and veins that understood lift. The line between ground and sky softened. Offshore, chalk blue seas hosted their own grace. Ichthyosaurs reached the clean geometry of speed. Crescent tails, big eyes tuned to depth, births at sea. Plesiosaurs countered with wide chests and oar limbs, some wearing necks long as questions that seemed to ask the water where the next fish hid. Coral reefs, rebuilt in new partnerships, tessellated light into homes. Ammonites coiled their thoughts tighter and rode currents like ornaments on the tide. Rifting did more than rearrange maps. It moved climate sliders. Fresh coastlines breathed salt into storms. Carbon moved differently through rock and air. Volcanoes along the new seams wrote fire language that the sky read as warmth. But the oceans, broad and busy, pulled heat down and carried it along unseen rails. Feedbacks, old friends, kept the tempo playable. Through it all, mammals remained, their lineage never absent, only modest. No bigger than patience, they hunted insects by moon and tucked their soft young against milk-warm ribs. They practiced nights, noses, and minds that could hold maps of smell. The world's loudness did not drown them. It gave them space. Earth did not compose the Jurassic for us. It composed it because stress eased, rifts opened, water returned, and life, given corridors and time, always writes more lines. If you've stood in a redwood grove and felt your breath slow to tree pace, you've met this chapter's pulse. Height, damp light, and a hush that is not empty but full. Somewhere a small, feathered runner lifts from a branch and discovers the sentence that air makes when you trust it. By the Cretaceous, continents were loosening their old handshakes and drifting toward the map we almost recognize. Warm seas flooded low places and drew blue fingers far into land. The western interior seaway cutting North America in two, shallow shelves ringing young coasts with light. The air felt greenhouse soft. Seasons bent but seldom broke. In that long summer, a quiet revolution opened like a hand. Flowers arrived, not suddenly, but with the decisiveness of a new idea whose time had come. Angiosperms wrapped seeds in flesh and promise, stitched color into leaves, and wrote fragrances that could cross a field on evening air. Nectar pooled in tiny cups. Pollen wore barbs that clung to fur and feather. Insects learned the coordinates of petals. Beetles, flies, butterflies, and especially bees tuned their days to ultraviolet runes and sugar clocks. Coevolution, give and receive, signal and answer, turned meadows into conversations. Each bloom was a bargain. Carry my future, and I'll pay you in sunlight made sweet. Forests changed voice. Alongside conifers and cycads, new broadleaf canopies unfurled, casting mosaics of shade that moved like water over the understory. Roots stitched soil tighter, fallen litter decomposed faster, its chemistry friendlier to fungi that translated death into food with more haste than the Carboniferous world had managed. Rivers carried that fertility outward, Floodplains fattened, wetlands braided life into the edges of lakes the color of sky. Dinosaurs read the new script in different hands. Hadrosaurs wore dental batteries that ground plants like mills. Ceratopsians turned horn and frill into display and defense. Ankylosaurs dragged living shields through fern dusk. Tyrannosaurs distilled motion into focus and bite. Feathers, born for warmth and message, became common punctuation. On small, bright-eyed hunters and higher in the air, on birds whose flight had traded teeth for beaks and heavy tails for balance and control. Offshore, chalk seas learned a softer snow. Microscopic plankton, coccolithophores, built plates of calcite that fell in endless drifts, layering the seafloor in powder so fine you can pinch it into fingerprints. Later, uplift would carve those deposits into white cliffs that hold the Cretaceous in their very name. Above them, ammonites coiled through currents like living jewelry. Mosasaurs, sleek, muscular lizards returned to water, ruled with lungs and hunger. Long-necked plesiosaurs, patient as anchors, grazed schools of fish the way clouds graze light. Tectonics tuned the climate behind the scenes. New ocean gateways and vigorous seafloor spreading pushed sea level high. Volcanoes along rifts and arcs wrote warmth into the sky. Weathering and plant life answered, drawing carbon back down grain by grain. The thermostat never sat still. It hovered around a livable key, not by design, but by cycles that have argued and agreed for eons. If you sit beside a summer field today and listen to the soft riot of bees, you are hearing the Cretaceous rehearsed in miniature. Color as invitation, fragrance as map, flight as a bridge between one rooted life and another. None of this was composed for us. The sweetness we taste is a byproduct of deals struck long before language, proof that usefulness can be beautiful without asking permission. Even this long summer, though, carried weather on the horizon. Continents kept moving. Deep engines murmured. Somewhere in the dark between stars, a stone traveled a path that would one day cross ours and press a thumbprint into the planet's page. In a warm Cretaceous afternoon, with flowers open and seas bright with plankton, a stone arrived. It had crossed quiet for ages, unbothered by prayers or plans, and met Earth above a blue gulf we now call Yucatan. In a heartbeat, rock moved like water. Air turned to hammer. The crust rang. A crater 100 miles wide opened like a wound and flashed to glass. What followed felt like the opposite of weather. Lightning everywhere at once, shockwaves racing the horizon, tsunamis shouldering reefs aside and running inland until forests stood dripping salt. Pebbles of melted rock, tektites, rose and fell as a hot rain. Across continents, wildfires found oxygen and wrote black script through canopies. Then the bigger quiet came. Dust, sulfate aerosols, and soot climbed high into the stratosphere and pulled a sudden curtain across the sun. It was not the heat that finished the Cretaceous. It was the absence of light. photosynthesis stalled. Plankton's soft snow thinned. Food webs, built on sunlight's daily deposit, discovered how many withdrawals they could survive. Many could not. Ammonites, those coiled scribes of the sea, closed their books. Great marine reptiles went still. On land, the large-bodied dinosaurs that had read the meadows so well met a season that would not end. The record keeps the receipt. A thin, dark line in rocks worldwide, spiked with iridium, a metal more common in meteorites than Earth's crust, seeded with shocked quartz, crowded with spherules, sometimes dusted with soot. You can put a fingertip across that boundary and cover a hinge of time. Above it, different castes fill the stage. Survival, as always, favored habits that matched the new rules. Creatures that hid, waited, or could sip many kinds of food kept their pages open. Small mammals curled in burrows, eating seeds and insects. Birds, the dinosaurs that wore feathers lightly, found perches in the dark and woke to a changed morning. Crocodilians, patient and amphibious, let the world pass over them. In the understory, seeds slept through long nights and sprouted when light returned. Ferns, quick to move into scars, made green out of ash. Recovery was not triumphant. It was incremental. Sunlight, at last, found the ground again. Algae returned to the seas. Plankton rebuilt the base. Currents remembered their roots. Forests rose from charcoal. In time, new branches unwound from old trunks. Birds diversifying in air their ancestors had only tested. Mammals widening from mouse-sized generalists into grazers, climbers, runners, and thinkers who would one day watch a comet shower and feel both awe and caution. Earth did not aim the stone. It merely occupied a crowded cosmos. The lesson is not fear, it is scale. Systems as grand as oceans can flicker. Summer can end in an afternoon and take 1,000,000 years to come back. Balance is not a guarantee, it is a practice. If you stand on a chalk cliff or hold a small gray clay where the boundary lies, you touch the pause between two versions of the world. We were nowhere near to see it. The planet kept its appointments without us, and then, patiently, set the table for new guests. When the curtain lifted after that brief night, the stage felt smaller and kinder. Light returned like a careful guest. Along river margins and in the shadow of fresh sprouts, survivors tested the day. Birds with light bones and sure feet. Crocodilians patient as stones. Small mammals whose nights of hiding had trained them for many kinds of food and many ways to wait. Forests came back first in whispers, ferns softening the wounds, shrubs threading shade, then canopies knitting a green ceiling that filtered the sun. In that filtered light, mammals widened from modest to many. Some learned to climb with hands that could grasp and eyes that judged depth. Early primates mapping branches the way rivers map valleys. Others pressed their ribs into the grammar of speed. little hoofed runners measuring distance in heartbeats. Still others turned dusk into a study, sharpening ears and noses until smell could draw a map and sound could mark a trail. Two lineages changed scale by changing medium. One spread its fingers into membranes and let night hold them. Bats, writing calligraphy in echoes, catching insects by listening to the air bounce off them. The other walked downhill toward the sea and did not stop. Ankles narrowed into Fluke's ancestors, hips loosened, ear bones tuned to underwater thunder, and a shore-loving grazer became a swimmer, then a hunter. Whales carrying lungs into the deep and teaching them to be patient. The seas themselves softened into long, warm moods, currents braided differently around new coastlines. For a while, on the planet's clock, a hot flash, the Earth ran a brief fever. Carbon surged, the air warmed, forests pressed poleward. Rain fell in patterns that felt unfamiliar. Life moved its furniture to cooler rooms. Then, grain by grain, rock weathering and the quiet burial of carbon remembered their roles, and the fever broke. Forests reoccupied their old latitudes. The thermostat settled to a gentler key. Birds, the dinosaurs that kept the sky, diversified into voices and shapes the wind could carry farther. Waders with legs like reeds. Raptors threading thermals with needle feathers. Songbirds learning to place notes into the morning, the way dew places light on a leaf. Insects rehearsed old partnerships with new flowers. Ants mastered societies that turned a forest floor into a living traffic map. The loops tightened again. Leaf to litter, litter to soil, soil to root, root to leaf. None of this was rehearsal for us. The planet was simply doing what it knows, closing cycles, exploring niches, letting feedbacks argue until balance found a voice everyone could hear. If you pause on a humid summer path and listen, really listen, you can hear the Paleogene's confidence, a layered chorus where no single singer carries the song. We arrive much later. For now, the morning belongs to small jaws and careful hands, to wings that drink darkness, to lungs learning the deep's pressure and patience. The world is not rebuilding for us. It is rebuilding because that is what worlds do. As the Cenozoic day lengthened, the planet tilted gently toward cool. Mountains rose where plates pressed, Himalaya, Tibet, Andes, lifting rock into air and grinding it into dust that weathering turned into a slow carbon sink. Far south, the circumpolar current spun a cold necklace around Antarctica, sealing ice into a long appointment with the poles. With oceans and winds rearranged, rain maps shifted. Forests thinned in many belts, and a new kind of green stepped forward. Grass. Grasses do not stand like trees, they flow. Their bodies keep the growth engine at the base, safe from teeth and flame. When grazed, they answer by growing tighter. When burned, they return by first light. Many invented a clever carbon math, C4 photosynthesis, that keeps energy books balanced under hard sun and low CO2. In their leaves, silica crystals, phytoliths, set grit into food, asking mouths to meet a sharper diet. Teeth obliged. Enamel rose into high-crowned ramparts. Jaw joints learned endurance. Tongues and stomachs turned into long conversations, with microbes that could unlock tough sugars. Across continents, the world learned distance. Prairies, steppes, savannas, names for the same idea. Sky close, horizon honest. Herds found their rhythm in the open. Antelopes and gazelles stitching brightness into motion. Horses pairing feet to a single spring-loaded toe. Camels and llamas testing dry routes. Rhinos writing bulk into speed. Elephants' kin tried many sizes and tusk shapes, migrating with the rains and teaching memory to move in family lines. Fire changed from accident to architect. Lightning walked afternoons, found cured stems, and scribbled fast, low flames that tidied shrubs from between the grasses and returned minerals to soil. Some seeds learned to wait for heat before opening. Some sprouts counted on the ash's brief generosity. Herbivores kept the balance, trimming fuel so fire seldom climbed into the few trees that stood. Acacias bright with thorns, eucalypts nursing oils, oaks learning to wear scars like medals. Wind, hooves, flame, and rain turned the plains into a four-part harmony that could play through dry years and sing after storms. Predators wrote their lines thin and long. Cheetahs tuned muscles to sprint's single sentence. Wolves and wild dogs made grammar out of teamwork. Big cats carried forest's stealth onto grass, trading branches for tawny patience and a final rush. In the air, kites and vultures read thermals like braille. On the ground, burrowing owls and foxes shared crossroads of safety beneath the same sky. Humans are not in this chapter yet. The savanna exists without footprints like ours. It asks nothing but sunlight and the promise that seasons will return. If you have stood in tall grass and heard it pour around your legs in wind, you have felt the Miocene and Pliocene practicing the feeling of forever. Repeatable abundance held together by movement, not walls. Grasses did more than feed herds, they fed climate. Their deep roots stitched carbon into soil, thickening dark horizons that hold water like a kindness. Dust from growing drylands carried minerals to oceans and forests downwind, a quiet subsidy across basins and seas. The planet's thermostat, always arguing with itself, found a cooler key it could keep for a while. Somewhere in these open rooms, a primate line will step from shadow to edge, widen its stride, and start measuring distance with thought. But the plains were already complete, their cycles closed, their beauty unbothered by our absence. On the mosaic edges where shade met sun, patches of woodland stitched into open grass, an ape stood a little taller and tried a different rhythm. The Rift Valley lifted and cracked. Lakes grew and shrank with shifting rains. Food moved across the map like weather. In these changing rooms, bodies that could switch gates had an edge. Knuckles still knew branches, but hips, knees, and ankles began to conspire with the ground. Bipedal steps arrived, first as a habit among many, then as a signature. Walking on two legs wasn't a declaration, it was thrift. On long, hot days, an upright back met less sun. A tall posture caught breezes near the surface that crawls and crouches miss. Striding legs spent less energy per mile than a four-limb trot. Free hands could steady a child, carry a root, a gourd of water, a stone. Eyes lifted could read the horizon for fruiting trees, distant storms, or the clean geometry of a lake after rain. Feet changed their grammar. Big toes aligned with the others. Arches sprung to store and return energy. Ankles learned a forward promise. Pelvises broadened to balance each step. Spines tucked gentle curves into themselves to hold heads level while the world moved underneath. Teeth and jaws shifted too. Less slicing, more grinding, fitting a mixed menu of fruit, tubers, leaves, and the occasional prize cracked or scavenged from bone. Picture a small band moving at dawn, elders with maps of memory, juveniles testing the edges, an infant soft against a hip. They follow last night's elephants to a clay pan where minerals brighten the taste of water. On the way back, someone carries firewood without using a mouth. Someone else keeps a flake of sharp stone, because sometimes a root needs persuading or a hide needs opening. These are not yet makers in the way we mean it. They are keepers of distance, of tools found, of roots that link one green island to the next. Rain schedules leaned and changed. Some years painted the valley in wide strokes of plenty. Others wrote in scarcity and dust. Flexibility became a survival trait you could see. Broader diets, wider home ranges, social ties that stretched like bridges over bad seasons. Calls and gestures thickened into a rougher fabric of meaning. Night fires would come later. For now, dusk meant climbing back into safety, branches that still knew how to hold a dreaming body, while stars practiced their slow drift. We like to imagine these walkers as prefaces to us, but the planet did not title the chapter that way. Bipedalism, dexterous hands, long childhoods, the package we recognize, wasn't a plan. It was a path that happened to pay its own costs in a landscape of moving targets. Many cousins tried versions of this answer. Most lines ended. A few kept stepping. If you've felt your stride settle on a long, empty road, hip swinging, breath even, mind opening to the distance, that is the old economy speaking. Energy saved is future earned. 2 feet are a quiet technology that turned space into possibility. Earth still did not need us. It offered rooms, shade, water, wind, and these apes learned to move between them with a new grace. The horizon got closer because walking made it so. Somewhere between trees and plain, hands stopped only finding and began shaping. Pebbles became edges, edges became plans. The first tools were modest, flakes struck from a core, as quick and bright as a spark. But inside that brightness lay a longer idea. If you can change a stone, you can change a morning. If you can carry an edge, you can carry tomorrow. Early Homo moved with that patience. Nappers learned to see through rock, to feel a seam, angle a blow, and release a useful blade. Cores and flakes nested in slings and memories. Near water holes and carcasses, cut marks recorded a new grammar. Scrape, slice, share. Meat and marrow widened diets and shrank distances between bodies. Chewing softened. Guts shifted their budgets. Brains, expensive organs, were paid for more reliably. Then the edge learned symmetry. Acheulean handaxes appeared, teardrops of intention, thin and balanced, turning in the palm like a thought made visible. They were not just knives. They were time you could hold. Hours of practice. A signature that could outlast the hand that made it. Children watched, tried, failed, and tried again. Skill became heritage. Around these circles of teaching, social weather thickened. Pair bonds stretched across seasons. Elders mattered because they remembered where water hides in bait years, and how stone opens cleanly in good light. Voices and gestures gathered more meanings. Warning, invitation, this way, not that. Nights pulled people closer. Eyes glowed beyond the fire's circle, first as fear, then as story, as fire itself, kept, then learned, edited the day. Flames cooked roots into sweetness and meat into safety, unlocking calories and quieting parasites. Sparks pushed cats back to the dark and pulled talk into the center. Smoke followed wind. Embers followed footsteps. With hearths came new rooms in the mind. Here and later, carry and keep, we will return. Overhead, the planet practiced its own long rhythms. Ice advanced and withdrew on faraway continents. Rains in Africa shifted like a hinge between lakes and dust. Landscapes mosaicked and remosaicked. Flexibility became fate. Bands widened their ranges, braided rivers into roots, learned the taste of many plants and the pulse of many migrations. The map was never still, but the loops still closed. Waste feeding soil, soil feeding root, root feeding breath. No committee of mountains chose us. The world offered edges and seasons. Early humans answered with edges and seasons of their own. We did not make Earth complete. We learned a way to travel through what it already was, carrying flame, carrying tools, carrying one another. If you've ever held a pocket knife and felt a small, unreasonable comfort, you've touched that chapter. Readiness as kindness, preparation as love. A blade means a plan. A plan means time. The horizon is wider now. Footsteps lengthen. Shorelines we have never seen begin to whisper. When hands learned time and fire learned patience, feet learned distance. Mornings began earlier, packs a little heavier with edges and embers, and horizons felt less like walls and more like doors. Early humans didn't conquer roots. They listened to them. Grass bent one way for seasons. Herds braided valleys into paths. Rivers taught the hand to trace maps by following cool. We stepped out of Africa not once, but in pulses, openings in climate like windows that lift, close, and lift again. Picture a dry season sharpening. Lakes shrink to mirrors rimmed in salt. Bands gather at the last good water, trade news, and notice birds falling along a flyway that points north. Someone remembers a canyon with shade at noon. Someone else knows a ford where elephants cross. You follow not only animals but stories, the way tributaries find a river. Stone changes underfoot, basalt to flint to chert, and with it the flavors of your tools. Hand axes travel, their symmetry repeated like a prayer that works from the rift to the Levant, from Caucasus foothills to the long beaches of the Indian Ocean. Ice far away breathes in and out, raising and lowering seas as if the planet were counting. When the breath is in, glaciers swollen, coastlines march outward, exposing shelves smooth as sentences. When the breath is out, glaciers easing, estuaries flood, and mangroves write roots into new rooms. Corridors appear, green bridges across Sinai, grassy skirts around the Black Sea, island chains in Indonesia, where the horizon arrives as stepping stones. We walked when the map invited us and waited when it did not. Travel taught bodies new thrift. Long tendons turned ankles into springs. Shoulders freed from walking became cranes for throwing. Skins, dark and clever with sweat, learned to carry heat away so the brain could stay bright. We became persistence itself, able to run not fastest, but farthest, to keep a trot until distance turned into dinner, to share that dinner so the slowest child still learned the route. Nights braided strangers into kin around fire that smelled familiar in unfamiliar wind. We weren't alone on the road. Other humans, cousins in the genus we shared, held other latitudes with other answers. Thick-browed artisans learned winter and the comfort of caves. Island tinkerers miniaturized or doubled down, making dwarfs of giants and giants of modest lines. We met sometimes. We watched often. Later we would mix. But the land did not wait for a verdict. It kept offering rooms, steppe, monsoon forest, montane meadow, the dry generosity of savanna. Our success wasn't destiny. It was fluency, learning to say enough in many dialects of place. Coasts whispered a new grammar. Shell middens rose like calendars of tide. Rafts, bundled reeds, lashed driftwood, stitched short gaps between islands. Kelp forests wrote a long, edible ribbon along cold shores where fish were fat, and storms, for part of the year, polite. Rivers invited canoes. Rivers taught patience with flood and famine. Rivers carved stories into the mind that even children could follow in their sleep. Cold drew long lines on the map. Glaciers stepped down from high latitudes and shouldered mountains into quieter shapes, carving U-valleys and hanging tributaries like unbuttoned sleeves. Sea level fell, exposing shelves where kelp combed the tide and mammoths later would walk. Winds braided dust across continents. Loas settled like pages of pale script that grasses would someday read. Between icy maximums, warmth threaded brief interludes, and the planet's breath, glacial in, interglacial out, set the tempo. Life did not stop. It rearranged. Forests marched south, then north again. Tundra and steppe stitched into a single vast pasture. Mammoth steppe, rich in short, cold, bright grasses. Herds learned distance as daily bread. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, steppe bison, saiga, wild horses, all carrying winter in their coats and memory in their roots. Predators tuned themselves to that moving abundance. Cats with sabers like punctuation marks. Wolves writing teamwork into snow. Short-faced bears testing bulk against scarcity. Humans learned winter as a teacher, not an enemy. We braided fur and sinew into layers, shaped bone and antler into needles, lashed runners beneath loads and pulled warm houses out of hide and driftwood where trees were stingy. Fire moved from comfort to currency. Melted water, softened roots, tempered points, kept talk alive when the night tried to take it. In the lean months, we followed rivers frozen to clean lines, listened to caribou hooves drum the ground, and set traps where tracks crossed like sentences in the same language. The ice taught edges. It made coastlines honest and corridors plain. Beringia broad as a country, North Sea a meadow, the yellow sea stepping stones at low tide. It also taught humility. Storms that would not bargain, whiteouts that erased maps, thin blue crevasses that argued persuasively for caution. We carried children anyway. We sang to keep time. We told stories of animals so that, when they appeared again in spring, our hands would remember their sizes, and our hearts would remember their worth. Beneath the ice, bedrock kept its patience. Pressure polished granite, plucked it, ground it, left moraines like commas on the land, where the ice paused to consider. When the cold eased, meltwater ran green with rock meal and fed bloom after bloom in seas waiting for the taste of iron. Salmon learned to read new rivers. Lakes filled footprints left by the great white herds of ice. None of this needed us. The Milankovitch rhythms, tilt, wobble, and stretch of Earth's path, argued with sunlight and wrote the chapters. Volcanism added footnotes. Oceans carried messages between hemispheres like reliable couriers who never sleep. We learned to keep pace, to store fat in good years, to thank marrow and ember, to plan not just for later, but for when the world tilts again. If you've stood beside a glacier's snout and heard it pop and sigh, you know the sound of a planet thinking slowly. If you've watched northern lights move like breath over a black tree line, you've seen cold made beautiful without needing anyone to witness it. The great winter would loosen. Valleys would green. Rivers would find new beds. And we, already walkers with pockets of time, would meet seeds that stayed through seasons and animals that stayed near us when we stayed near them. When the ice stepped back and rivers relaxed into new beds, a softer season lingered. The Holocene did not arrive as a trumpet. It arrived as a long exhale. Winters less severe, summers that kept their appointments, rains that learned a rhythm even children could guess. In that steadier light, we tried a different answer to distance. Instead of following food, we invited it to stay. Seeds had always known patience. We learned to match it. Hands that once carried embers began to carry wild grains, then plant them in cleared patches where ash had sweetened the soil. Fire, once a traveler, became a gardener, opening mosaics in grasslands, keeping shrubs honest, drawing deer to the new green that follows a cool burn. Along damp margins, we coaxed water sideways into channels, then into fields. Wheat and barley found footholds where snowmelt braided. Millet answered monsoon. Rice learned to stand in mirrors and feed villages from paddies that reflected the sky. Animals tested nearness, too. Wolves that lingered at our edges, bold enough to trust and clever enough to learn, became dogs. Partners with noses that could find what our eyes could not. Hearts that could read our moods before our words formed. Later, we learned the grammar of the herd. Sheep that measure safety in flock. Goats that climb hunger's steepest sentences. Cattle that turn grass. The sun's coarse script. Into milk and muscle we can read. Pigs translated kitchens into forest and back again, erasing waste and writing plenty. Staying changed our bodies and maps. Villages took root at river bends. Granaries turned seasons into stone. Stories turned boundaries into belonging. We traded the old, wide insurance of distance for the new, deep insurance of storage. Teeth recorded softer diets. Bones carried the signatures of hours bent over fields. We learned to count the sky for planting and to read the soil for rest. Some lands fattened under this new attention. Others overworked, thinned, and asked for time we did not always give. We did not invent agriculture in a single place or a single language. It rose where edges invited it. The fertile crescents meeting of steppe and river. The yellow silt plains that remember China's long winds. The hill flanks where teosinte became maize in Mesoamerica. The high gardens of the Andes where potato learned our names. Sorghum and yams humming in African rains. Taro and breadfruit holding blue lanes across Pacific water. Each domestication was a conversation, offer, refusal, acceptance, carried across generations until seed and hand recognized each other. We also edited landscapes at scale. Terraces taught hills to keep soil. Canals taught flood to behave like blessing. In wetlands, we wove reeds into worlds. In forests, we opened light for chestnut, hazel, and sago, with cuts that understood recovery. Not all edits were kind. Forests fell faster than they could remember themselves. Salts crept into irrigated fields that were hurried too hard. But the loops still aimed to close. Manure to field, chaff to animal, straw to roof to soil again. Earth did not need our gardens to be complete. Grasslands already flowed. Rivers already fed floodplains. Beavers had long practiced the craft of slowing water into habitat. We joined that guild of engineers with our own clumsy grace, sometimes generous, sometimes blind. When we got it right, abundance spread like shade at noon. When we did not, the land told us so, and we learned, or we moved. If you've stood at dusk in a rice field and heard frogs count the hours while the sky repeats itself in water, you have heard the Holocene's lullaby. Stay, tend, return. Staying grew walls. Grain stacked higher than a season needed asked for guardians, for counting, for places to keep the future dry. Villages thickened into towns where paths braided and didn't unbraid by nightfall. Markets learned the smell of distant hills. Songs kept lists so mouths could remember what clay would later write. With surplus came specializations. Hands that knew only stone or only fiber or only the way a boat answers crosswind. And with them, the long, careful braid of interdependence. Fire changed color. Kilns learned to hold their breath and climb hotter. And ore that once blurred into rock separated like a secret finally told. Copper softened into forms that fit a grip. Tin, rare as luck, turned copper into bronze, an edge that stayed honest. Later, furnaces gathered courage and pulled iron from soil, a metal that demanded the patience of charcoal, bellows, and heat sustained past comfort. Tools cut deeper, plows met earth with new leverage, axes spoke faster to trees. Strength multiplied, but so did appetite. Woodlands stepped back from river margins and hillsides, asking for time we did not always give. Rivers wore crowns now, levees, quays, carved stones that read water like law. In flood, they filled canals that fed fields. In drought, they held a mirror thin as mercy. Cities faced them like theaters, each quarter tuned to trade, work, prayer, rest. Writing fixed what wind might steal, debts, births, distances, treaties with rain. Calendar stones taught moons to behave, and when they didn't, we argued with them and adjusted. Trade followed winds and patience. Monsoon breathed in and out across warm seas, and our hulls learned to leave with one season and return with another. Desert routes stitched oases into sentences you could cross with a camel's step and a competent dawn. Salt moved. Obsidian moved. Stories moved fastest of all. Recipes for metal, shapes for ships, ideas of gods and law and measure. We were not making Earth more complete. We were adding our own loops to its older ones. Grain to mouth to field to granary. Ore to fire to blade to furrow to ash to soil again. Cities learned heat in other ways too. Bodies gathered raised their own weather. Smoke that tastes of bread and coal. Warmth that lingers after sunset. Noise that keeps owls farther out than they'd prefer. Rats read our maps as if they were written for them. Dogs took on names and jobs. Cats accepted worship and returned it as indifference. We set stones in arches that learned to hold sky. We set mirrors to the heavens and named the lights, not to own them, but to keep time with something older than walls. Sometimes we listened well. Terraces stepped mountains into gardens that held their ground through violent rain. Wetlands near cities were left to breathe, and in breathing they kept water sweet. Sometimes we didn't. Hills bald with haste slid when storms came. Fields salted by impatience forgot how to feed the very mouths that had asked too much. Plagues learned our density and took their due. We answered with care and error, with rights and repairs, with the stubbornness that brought us here at all. Earth still did not need any of this. Rivers ran before calendars, metals slept fine in rock. But by staying, we learned a new tenderness, to be responsible to a place, to wake to the same bend in the same river, and notice when it looks tired. We reached back into coal's dark pages and set them on fire. Forests that had fallen into carboniferous silence, sunlight folded into stone, became heat on demand. Heat became pressure. Pressure turned wheels. Steam learned to push pistons the way tides push moonlit shores, and the day began to run. Iron met coal in a pact of sparks. Rails stitched valleys to ports. Locomotives pulled distance together until towns woke to the same whistle. Mines dropped deeper. Mills learned to spin night into cloth. In the glow of boilers and the pulse of flywheels, time took a new shape, measured not by seasons, but by shifts, not by ripening, but by rates. What a field had asked of wind and rain, an engine now asked of fuel. Light left the sun and entered rooms. Whale oil, then coal gas, then electric filaments made dusk negotiable. Wires crossed the land like quick rivers. Telegraph keys tapped weather into words. Later, radio loosened the wire and let voices step across mountains. The world did not get larger or smaller. It got nearer. Grain moved farther than a village could dream, and with it, ideas and debts and the wish to go. Chemistry widened from kitchen to continent. Coke smelted iron clean. Bessemer air poured strength into steel. Fertilizer, nitrogen pulled from sky by flame and pressure, fed soils beyond what manure and clover could promise. Medicines learned to quiet fevers that had always had the last word. Pipes and pumps moved water uphill and sewage downhill, turning sickness, for many, from fate into problem. Comfort increased, unevenly but undeniably. But engines build in a currency older than money. Carbon that had slept for millions of years woke in a century. The sky, which had been a dependable partner, felt the weight of our speed. Carbon dioxide climbed. Soot and sulfur wrote the first dirty chapters over growing cities, and then we learned scrubbers and stacks and cleaner fires. The planet kept balancing, but the terms were changing. Glaciers in high places began to thin their signatures. Summers tested new edges. None of this made Earth more complete. The cycles still closed. Water rose and fell. Rock weathered to clay and returned to stone. Oceans carried heat along invisible rails. We had simply learned to pull harder on a few threads. The fabric held, but it tightened in our hands. Yet it wasn't just extraction. We also learned repairs. Forests planted on tired hills held soil that would have washed to sea. Wetlands restored behind levees remembered how to sweeten water. Cities found lungs in parks where trees wrote shade onto asphalt. Not enough, not everywhere, not yet, but real. If you stand on an old trestle and feel the ghost of a train in the boards, you can hear the industrial's rhythm: pressure, release, arrival. The comfort we cherish: warm rooms, clean water, lights that obey a switch, rests on coal's ancient sun and oil's buried summer. Our task is to keep that comfort while loosening the grip we've put on the sky. Earth never needed our engines. They are our mirrors, showing how quickly we can change the rules and how carefully we must learn to change them back. We stitched the night side of Earth with light and called it progress. From orbit, our cities look like constellations. We drew ourselves: amber webs across deltas, strings along coasts, a scattering through deserts where roads carry fuel and hope. The view is beautiful, and it is honest. It shows how thoroughly we have learned to move matter and energy, to reroute rivers, to turn ancient sun into speed, and how easily we can tug on threads that hold the living fabric together. Carbon climbs again, not the gentle rise and fall of deep time, but a steep line written in a few human lifetimes. The sky thickens by invisible degrees. Oceans drink part of the excess and grow a little more sour. Corals, patient architects, bleach and, in places, go quiet. Ice remembers a colder promise and lets go. Mountain glaciers retreat up their valleys. Greenland and Antarctica sigh in white increments that look like nothing today and add up to shorelines tomorrow. Forests that once banked carbon catch fire in hot, windy hours, and peatlands disturbed exhale what they had sworn to keep. Species step backward. Some go missing in ranges where names were once enough to find them. Others retreat to cooler altitudes, narrower bands, smaller maps. Roads and fences slice habitats into islands. Plastic learns to behave like sand in the wrong places. Nitrogen and phosphorus, fertility in wise amounts, spill until algae bloom and water forgets how to breathe. Earth does not hate us for this. It cannot. It only answers. Feedbacks speak the way they always have. More heat changes rain. Changed rain changed growth. Changed growth changes heat again. On long scales, the planet will rebalance. Carbon will find stone. Coasts will redraw. Forests of some kind will write shade over something that needs it. The open question is not whether Earth endures. It is who gets to be comfortable while it remembers how. We are not powerless. That too is in the lights you see from orbit. We can change fast. We already have, many times. Engines that drank coal now sip wind and sunlight through grids that learn to flex. Rooftops turn to harvest. Batteries teach night to borrow from day. Cities find shade again in trees. Quieter streets in feet and rails. Cleaner air in filters we place at the source instead of in our lungs. Rivers breathe when dams come down. Floodplains remember how to hold storms. Coastlines heal where marsh and mangrove are invited back to work. On land, repairs look like humility made practical. Soil kept covered and alive. Water slowed and sunk instead of hurried away. Herds moved with grass instead of against it. Fire used in the cool seasons that trees can forgive. Corridors thread wild hills so that animals can live their distances again. Indigenous care, long treated as memory, is recognized as method. In towns, repair looks like insulation and shared heat, tools that outlive fashion, fewer things built better and loved longer. We don't need to save the planet. We need to learn to stay without breaking the room we're in. Earth never needed us to be complete. But if we wish to belong here kindly, we can choose to live like good latecomers, quieting our engines, widening our care, and letting old cycles close again. If Earth never needed us, then the kindest question is not how to matter, but how to belong. Belonging is smaller than drama and larger than pride. It sounds like a window cracked at night to let the house breathe, like shoes left by the door so mud stays where plants can use it, like tools that last because someone sharpened them before they were dull. At planet scale, belonging is simple and demanding. We match our appetite to the day's income, not the vault of ancient sunlight. We wire our lives to light and wind and moving water, letting batteries keep the lull between gusts and dusk. We insulate walls so warmth doesn't spend itself on air it can't hold. We move more in ways that do not burn. Feet, wheels that share, rails that hum. None of this is punishment. It is comfort learned from physics. Quiet rooms, clean lungs, money saved for better uses than smoke. Belonging in soil is softer still. Keep it covered. Feed it life. Let roots stay and mycorrhizae stitch their threads between neighbors. When water falls hard, give it time. Swales, contour lines, floodplains remembered and returned. Graze like the herds once did. Many mouths briefly, then long rest. Fire like the elders taught, cool, early, surgical, so forests wear mosaic instead of scar. Plant hedgerows so birds can carry seeds across fences, so insects can commute without dying in traffic. In cities, belonging looks like shade made of leaves and roofs that do double work. Harvest rain, host gardens, reflect heat back to a sky that can handle it. It looks like repair cafes and libraries of things, bikes that wait where you actually live, apartments that hear each other without listening through thin walls. It looks like letting rivers touch their banks in winter and walk fields with clean feet in spring. It looks like waste streams renamed, steel that is reborn, plastics that learn to be fewer and truer, compost that returns to places hungry for it. In oceans, belonging means leaving room, shipping lanes that swerve for whales, nets that let juveniles become parents, coasts armored with marsh and mangrove that take the punch from storms and feed the nurseries that feed us. If we must take, we take with calendars and thresholds, and we stop while the future still has its full set of options. Belonging is also a story we tell ourselves without lies. We admit what we've broken and measure what we fix. We listen to people whose grandparents already solved the puzzle of living with fire, flood, and thin soils. We accept that justice is not a side quest. It is the work, because damage and benefit have never been evenly spread, and balance cannot return where trust is absent. None of this turns us into the point of the world. It turns us into acceptable company. We become a species that can sit down in the living room and not spill its drink on the rug. We become neighbors to rivers rather than landlords, apprentices to forests rather than owners, students of coastlines that move the way a breath moves, out, in, out. If you've ever fixed a loose hinge and felt the door swing true, you know the pleasure waiting here. The house is not yours forever. It was here before you. It will stand after you. But for your watch, it can be cared for. The reward is not glory, it is ease. Cool rooms under summer leaves, birdsong where engines used to shout, children who inherit choices instead of excuses. Earth remains complete without us. Belonging is our way of saying thank you anyway. Hold the 24-hour earth in your palm again. Midnight gave us a world forming. Dawn brought oceans. Long afternoon belonged to microbes and their blue sky. Evening raised forests, bones, and eyes. 11:59:56. Let us step into the light. In 4 seconds of human time, we learn to count the day, to heat houses in winter and cool them in summer, to cross an ocean overnight and send a voice around the planet in a blink. It feels like power. It is, more truly, proximity. We are very close to the controls. The controls are connected to everything else. Being temporary isn't failure. It's instruction. A mayfly skydives through a single afternoon and completes the assignment perfectly. A redwood holds storms for 2,000 years and still calls that a chapter, not a book. Our span, brief in stone, endless in sentiment, is enough to learn a craft, to repair more than we break, to teach more than we take, to hand a place to its next caretakers with its patience intact. Meaning, then, becomes smaller and kinder. Not change the world, but change this room you're in. A field that keeps its topsoil in heavy rain is meaning. A river that breathes all summer because its floodplain is free is meaning. A city block that sleeps under trees and wakes with birds is meaning. A classroom where a child learns to love a creek more than a screen. A clinic lit by rooftop sun. A bus that arrives so reliably, car keys look like strangers. These are the scales where belonging writes itself into the day. We do not need to be the point of earth to be a good sentence in its story. We can be the conjunctions and commas, and then, so that, because. We can be the hinge that lets an old door swing true again. Soil covered, water slowed, engines right-sized, waste renamed. We can carry forward human gifts that don't lean hard on the sky. Music, care, science, craft, good law, good bread. We can learn to count costs honestly. Carbon, habitat, time, attention. We can practice enough as a shared art, not a private austerity. There is tenderness, too, in letting go. Projects finish, gardens mature and need a different hand. Children outgrow the rooms we built for them. Even the best ideas have climates where they no longer fit. To love a place is to update the plan when the plan starts to hurt it. To love a future you will not see is to leave behind options instead of instructions. Listen. The planet is still breathing. The slow tide of seasons, the deep pulse of ice and ocean, the whisper of forests turning light into shade and wind into seed. That breath will outlast us. Our work is to match it while we're here, to make our seconds hospitable to others' seconds, to set down tools sharp and clean for hands we will never meet. Midnight is near on our little clock, and that is not a warning so much as a rhythm. Days end. Another begins. In the space between those 4 quiet seconds, we can choose grace. What if Earth never needed us? Then our presence is not a purpose to fulfill, but a courtesy to return. The planet was complete without our hours. Oceans condensing out of sky, microbes repainting air, cold dark forests building cathedrals from sunlight, extinctions editing and reopening the book, ice teaching edges, grasses turning distance into food, seeds inviting nearness, engines borrowing buried summer. We arrived late, learned quickly, and touched the thermostat with impatient hands. Still, the old cycles kept speaking. Balance is practiced, not possessed. Hold the day again. In Earth's 24-hour clock, midnight forged a world. Dawn poured rain. Noon belonged to cells. Evening sketched bodies. And at 11:59:56 we stepped in. Curious, clever, easily louder than wise. If that measure humbles you, let it soften you too. It means meaning can be local and honest. Not own the day, just keep this room kind. Soil that stays after a storm, water that breathes through summer, engines that hum within the budget of wind and light, streets that trade noise for shade, hands that repair more than they replace. We cannot repay deep time. We can pay attention. We can count true costs, carbon and habitat, labor and health, and choose designs that return more than they take. We can garden like apprentices of beaver and forest, travel as if horizons were neighbors, eat as if seasons mattered, build things worth inheriting, and retire them without poison when their work is done. We can treat justice as maintenance for the future. No balance will hold where benefits and burdens are stacked on the same few backs. There is tenderness in limits. Enough is a craft. It sounds like a kettle turning off because the room is warm, a bus arriving so reliably that keys stay on the hook, a floodplain left wide enough for a river to remember how to be a river. It looks like corridors where herds can live their distances, like roofs that harvest rain, like fire used in the cool seasons elders trust. It feels like air clearer than yesterday, because yesterday's choices were gentle. Someday, we will leave. Each of us, and eventually all of us. Earth will keep its appointments: tides, volcanoes, drift, the slow breath of ice and ocean. That was always the answer to our first question. The second answer is the gift we can make: to be good company while we're here, to hand the place forward with patience intact, options unspent, tools sharp and clean for hands we'll never meet. Close your eyes and listen. Wind in leaves that learned light before language, water ticking stone into sand, a night insect practicing a syllable older than cities. None of it needs you, all of it welcomes you. Breathe with it. Walk lightly inside it. Say thank you not with words but with the shape of your days.